joined by author Ed Gideon, who is a member of the Greensboro Rotary Club and who's been coaching and consulting for over 40 years. And really his leadership journey started in 1972 when he was an infantry platoon leader, but he's owned many businesses over the years, either partially or fully, so he has a lot of personal business experience and a lot of experience working with 75 leaders intensively and several hundred leaders from a coaching and consulting perspective. And he has a book called Breakthrough for Success, where he details stories of these leaders' challenges and how they achieved. And he's going to give us some great practical advice this morning. So look forward to hearing him.
Thank you, ma'am. I feel like an 8th grade cheerleader up here with all this stuff. If it's all right, I'm going to start these around as bookmarks that I'd like for you to have if you'd like one. That's about all I can do with that. But before we get started, completely, I got to apologize, and I hate to do that because starting with an apology is not a good idea. But I guess I managed to get some kind of a allergy or something, and I'm just now getting it out of my chest. So if I cough and stuff, just forgive me. What I'd like to do before we start talking about this is I'd like to take you on a quick journey. And if you will, we're going to go back to 1960. So if you'll come with me real quick. I know that's a long way back there. Some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. Well, let's go back to 1960. I was 11 years old, so do the math. You can figure it out. We're going back to West Texas, the town of Midland. Anybody familiar with Midland? Okay. Well, it's now about twice the size of what it was then. And I was in the process of becoming the Little League All-Star. I was going to absolutely conquer Little League. Well, actually, I was going to conquer baseball. I just didn't. I wasn't good at, but I started it, and so I had 2 years of really good stuff in Little League. And then the next year, I went to the Pony League, and I was a catcher. And Johnny Bitch wasn't around then, but Yogi Berra was, so I was going to be Yogi Berra. And the first year was good. It was a good year. Came in 4th in state. The next year, something happened on the way to the forum. All of a sudden, all my buddies were stealing second base off me. I couldn't get the throw down there fast enough. The short story, the short answer is, I just didn't grow like everybody else did. I just physically did not mature like they all did. So that little goal ingrained while, I hit some levels, it's got kind of failed. I didn't know it, but I did. Now the good news is, I still have my baseball card collection from 1958. My mother did not throw out. And I have this baseball. Now probably Robbie knows the answer to this, so I'm going to disqualify you. But it's signed by the only person who ever threw a perfect game in the World Series. Okay, Mike, catch. Don't throw this in your coffee. You can't have it.
Hello, I just get to fill it.
Yeah, pass it around. Pass it around, please. I need it back when I'm through. So that was okay. I soon realized that actually what had to happen was the University of Texas needed me to come play football. They still do. And you don't know how that hurts. God. But so I started in the 7th grade, and I played through my senior year in high school, and I loved it. And I knew that I was going to be the next. Well, Earl Campbell wasn't around then either. But anyway, I was going to be the next guy. Well, let's just say, has anybody ever heard of Friday Night Lights? No Friday Night Lights? Well, that's the football district. I played high school football. Permian High School in Odessa is the high school that story is written about. They were just 20 miles down here. I still haven't beaten Permian. But I was 155 pounds, dripping wet defensive end. Let's just say that there weren't a lot of spots on the University of Texas football team for me. I could have carried the water jug. Oh, and those guys in that district during that 60s time frame, this was 60s, that somebody from that district won the state championship at least 4 times, and they were either in the semifinals or quarterfinals. If they didn't get to the finals, about like 7 times out of that 10-year time frame. So it was a tough district to play football in. So I learned a little bit about goals and goal setting, and I learned about failure, although I really didn't know I'd learned about failure. And we all kind of probably have heard of this 4-step process, well, 4-step process of learning, and the first one is you don't know what you don't know. Anybody familiar with that little deal? And so I was at that level where I just didn't know what I didn't know, but I had failed, and I had set goals. I didn't realize it until later, and that's part of what I wanted to talk about. So let's come back to 2013 real quick, and what I'd like to do is discuss some things that I put in this book and why I put them there. I think you'll see that I don't have to spend a lot of time. As you can see, there's not a lot of research or theory in here. No, in deference to research, somebody's already done all that. And there are books that line the shelves that do a much better job than I could, and I just didn't see the need for it. So I said, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to talk about? What's going to be the relevance of this thing? And what I hope it has in it are stories that you can fix on and go, okay, that. It may not be for me personally, it may not be for you personally, but maybe you know somebody, a child or a coworker, or somebody in Washington, or somebody that you know that needs help or could use some guidance. Because I made it quick and short and bullet pointed so you could look at it and go, okay, I can do that. So that was the point of all this. Now let me get a show of hands. How many people in here own your own business? And how many of you work for somebody else? Now those of you that own your own business, how many of you wish you worked for somebody else? I always get a few on that. How many of us would like to start over at a younger age, knowing what we know now? Direct question. Why is that? Why is it we didn't get the information early on? Well, part of it just has to do with passage of time, doesn't it? And part of it has to do with no matter how much you read or whomever you speak with, you're just not going to get it until you put your hands on it and experience it. Would you agree with that? And so what I found was, what helped was to identify successful people and then just copy the hell out of them. You know, I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on everything. And so a lot of what I do is teach. And I'll work with a business owner, and I work with a wide variety, from eye surgeons to dentists to CPAs, retail, wholesale, manufacturing, distribution, collegiate, academic, military. So quite honestly, I cover the waterfront on the people with whom I work. But you really don't want me to do eye surgery on you. You really don't want that. And your molars are probably better. Did I see a dentist in here? Your molars are probably in better shape if I don't go in there and start poking at them. And you don't want me to do your tax return. But the common threads that run through all businesses, that's what I work on with people. And so you develop a way of talking to people and dealing with things, and it's kind of a teaching thing. And so, well, one example of teaching, I just have to tell you, there's one example of teaching that I think you'll understand. I was fishing one day out in West Texas, and I was having a bad day. I was running out of bait. And my fishing day was about to come to a halt. And all of a sudden I saw this cottonmouth water moccasin poisonous snake swimming by. And he had a frog in his mouth. Now, who's an outdoorsman here? Cooper? You an outdoorsman? You talk. So you may know this. When something like that has a frog in his mouth, their fangs are back like that. So he couldn't bite me. And for whatever reason, I knew that. So I grabbed the snake behind the neck, just like that. I did. And I took the frog out of his mouth and put it in my bait bucket. So now I had something to go fishing with. But I also have one really pissed off snake. And he's very poisonous, and he will bite me. And then I have what they call in West Texas a dilemma. How was I going to release this snake without being bitten?
Mike Cook knows.
We'll find out about that in a minute. Well, I had just happened to have taken a fair-sized tumbler of bug juice out there with me. Okay, it was a bottle of bourbon. So I grabbed this snake. I didn't grab him, I still had him. And I poured about 2 real big gulps of bourbon down his throat. I did. And his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. That's enough on that conversation. But he went limp, and I released him into the lake. Well, I grabbed up the frog, and I went back to fishing, so things were good. Well, in a minute, I felt a tug at my foot. And I looked down, and there, wrapped around my foot, and that bottle of bourbon was that damn snake, and he had 2 more frogs. So you got to be careful what you teach people. And it takes, teaching takes a wide variety of forms and gets a wide variety of results. And so when I put this book together, my aim was to talk about real people, real stories, and real results. There's nothing wrong with the research and theory, but I felt like you would want to know what's actually happened. Now, I changed the name of everybody in here, although everybody I talked to said, well, that's okay, you can put it in there, but I didn't. The testimonials in the back are real, but I just decided to change the names to protect the innocent. But what I wanted to talk to you about is 2 or 3 things that over 40 years I have found are common barriers. Because we all kind of hit barriers, don't we? In some form or another. I can't get over them, I can't get around them for whatever reason. So I just thought we'd talk about a couple of those real quickly. And the first one I want to talk about is change. Anybody in here ever had any problem dealing with a change in their personal or professional life? Okay, it's a trick question. Okay. And what I think is important is how we deal with change and how we control ourselves and our environment and people around us. When there are books, there are great big books written about change in an organization, and that's fine. That's not what I really am talking about here. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about when something happens to you, and you know when it's icy outside and you're walking on, and you kind of slip a little bit. You know that feeling where you're out of control for a second, and you get back in control. What I tell folks is that you're going to feel those slips in your life. We all are. But if you get it back in control quickly enough, typically, then the reason you were able to do that is because your goals and your focus and your intention and your attitude, and a few other things probably, are strong enough to pull you out of that. Does that make sense? And so what I have found is that it's really more how we respond to change than what happens to us. We're all going to get knocked down. We're all going to get knocked in the teeth, right? I mean, something's going to, I failed and didn't even know I was failing, actually. Failed a few times since then, too, but I've had some achievements as well and some successes. So what I try to help people do is recognize that it's not important that you get mad or rebel or blame something or somebody for change. Anybody ever experienced that with anyone? I know you have done it. But you've probably seen it somewhere else. So the idea is, what do we do? How do we deal with change? I'll give you an example. Go back to 1972, an infantry platoon leader. I was in that job for a year, and truly one of the most exciting, fun experiences I've ever had. And I had 40 guys that I'm training and working with. I had one guy, who was a complete rebel. He did not believe a thing that I said. He would not do much of anything that I said, no matter what. I took all his rank. I took all his money. I mean, we were just in a constant battle with each other. It was awful. And when I left there, I rotated out after a year. When I left there, that was the only regret I had. I really just didn't think I'd done very well. So one day I'm walking down the street, and this soldier salutes me and says, "Good morning, Lieutenant Gideon." Not unusual. We got our name tags up here, and you can read the rank and all that, but he was 20 feet away, so he knew me. But I didn't know him. I did not recognize him. And I got closer. His platoon buddies called him Alphabet because he didn't have very many vowels in his name. And I cannot remember his name right now, but I looked and I kind of did a double tap. Damn. And so I stopped him. I said, "Man, how are you doing?" This guy had a haircut. His boots were polished. He had a pressed uniform, starched uniform. He was clean shaven, and he had rank. He'd been promoted again. I said, "Man, what happened?" He said, "Sir, I just wanted to thank you." I said, "What?" He said, "I wanted to thank you for everything you tried to do for me." He said, "It made a difference, and it finally took." Well, I was reaching up there to take those bars off from the lieutenant and just go ahead and put stars up there for a general, because I had turned the Army. You could just go ahead and hire me to train everybody, because I had turned Alphabet. But I realized something a little bit later, and I realized where that change came from that he went through. Anybody want to guess how he got to that point? You want to guess who the catalyst was for his change?
He was.
Who?
Jail.
Yeah. He was his own catalyst. And that's where all change, that's where all reaction, that's where all action comes from, is from within, period. We've heard it before, but how many times do we actually see it or experience it? And this kid was the worst of the worst, but he had just gotten fed up after I talked to him a little bit longer. He's just gotten fed up with being who he was. Anybody ever done that? I have. I've been fed up with who I was and changed and went in different directions, quit doing some things. Next thing I want to talk to you about is self-limiting beliefs. Keep me on track here. Self-limiting beliefs. A lot of those things are put on us by other people. We're told that we can't do something because we're, male, female, don't have education, whatever it may be. And 100% of the time, what we find out, what we learn, is that we truly are the ones that are in charge of controlling that. And I'll give you an example. When I was 11 years old playing baseball, I had a coach tell me that I didn't have any self-confidence. Maybe I couldn't have gotten up in front of you guys when I was 11, but I think I wiggled my way out of that deal. I'm not sure that I knew what he was talking about. I'm not sure if I understood what lack of self-confidence really meant. What's another example of the self-limiting beliefs and how people overcome them? Well, how about Wilma Rudolph? Anybody ever heard of Wilma Rudolph? You know who she is?
Runner.
Runner. How many gold medals did she win in the 1960 Olympics in Rome? A lot. A bunch. But she was crippled when she was born. And I can't remember if it was polio or exactly what it was, but her parents massaged her legs, worked her out, exercised her. She got a coach. She's a sprinter. So obviously she overcame that little self-limiting belief that I can't do something. There were 4 guys that went into Decca Records in 1962, and the guys there said, "Buddy, I just don't think you can cut it. A bunch of guitars, I just don't think that music's going to cut it." And guess who that was? Beatles. 1956, truck driver goes to the Grand Ole Opry, and at the end of it, the guy said, "I think you just better go back to driving that truck, son. Just don't think people are going to like your sound." Elvis. In the early 70s, I think, there was a guy that played football at a small college in Tennessee, and he was good. But the pros came draft day, and the pros said, "Son, you just don't fit the description of the prototype for pro football." He said, "You're 6'9". We just can't have anybody out here that's that big." Ed Too Tall Jones was drafted number 1 the Cowboys. Went on to be a perennial All-Pro. So much for that stuff doesn't work, okay? So if you know somebody who's been pushed down or suffers from lack of confidence for whatever reason, that stuff is, I mean, it can be devastating to people, and it has been. But it's something that I'm sure we all know folks who have worked through it and gotten around it. Here's the last thing. When I was putting this together, I was going to put it at the end, but I moved it to the front because I think it's that important. And it's just 2 words: take action. Do something. Get up off your stuff and do something. And here's a little thing that I've got to read to you. It says, vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision passes time. But vision with action can change your life. And what we find is that good intentions just don't count. If you wish or hope or meditate or pray or whatever that something happens, but you don't get up and go do something, we don't get up and go do something, what's going to happen? Not much. And so it's a piece, once again, that I see some folks miss. They do great plans. Oh man, they've got a book of stuff. They got a list this long, but they just don't go do it. And Will Rogers had a great quote on this. He said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. And so I'm going to close with this. Excuse me. And it's a comment on a poem by Robert Frost. And it's about being right and making right choices. And the poem says, there are 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. And it goes on from there. Here's my thought of it. On the road you choose, you become what you look for. If you look for enemies, you will find them. If you look for hate, it will live in your heart. And if you look for gossip, it will consume you. And if you look for fear, it will follow you. But on the other road, if you look for friends, you will be befriended. And if you look for love, it will lift you up. And if you look for truth, it will set you free. And if you look for hope, it will take you to higher ground. Thank you for letting me talk to you today. Thank you, President. I appreciate your time.